Hello, everyone. I am Aishan Hutchinson, the director of the Creative Writing Program here at Cornell, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the third event of the Fall 2020 Barbara and David Zelazny Creative Writing Series at Home. This series is made possible thanks to the generosity of our donors, Barbara and David Zelazny, to whom we extend our bountiful thanks. This evening's event features the marvelous writer and editor, Wah-Ming Chang, who will be introduced by my colleague, Professor Helena Vermontes. Professor Vermontes will also have a conversation with Chang. You can participate in that conversation by submitting questions in the chat throughout the event, and I strongly encourage you to do so. This event is being recorded. The recording will be available to view at the same URL. Now, without further ado, over to Professor Vermontes.
Greetings, everyone. The Creative Writing Program first initiated the Shop Talk segment of the Zelazny Reading Series in response to undergraduate and graduate interests in fields that were symbiotic not only to the present creative writing process, but to the future creative writing progressions. In the past, we've invited the Library of Congress head of the Poetry and Literature Center. We've also invited the writer and editor of the anthology Scratch, Writers, Money, and the Art of Making a Living. Another invitee was the editorial director of Electric Literature, and of course, a number of literary agents. Adding to our prestigious list, it is my utter delight to introduce one of our esteemed alumni, a remarkable person with remarkable experiences working and publishing for the last 20 years. Wah-Ming Chang received an MFA in creative writing from Cornell University in 2006, followed by grants in fiction from the Saltonstall Foundation for the Arts, twice for the New York Foundation for the Arts, and other organizations, and has attended residencies at the Dickinson House and Yaddo. Her writing has appeared in Mississippi Review, Joyland, Brooklyn Rail, as well as other venues, and she is writing an album of fiction called Dream Stamps, and I'm hoping that we'll have enough time so that she could read a small excerpt from that. Combining her commitment to literature, to community building, and to writers and artists globally, she began a digital salon, the Low Key Reading Party, which started on Zoom in March 2020, and has continued with steady rapture every week since. Wah-Ming is currently Vice President of Company Culture and Senior Managing Editor at Catapult. Her presentation will be followed by a brief conversation, and then of course we'll open it up for the Q&A. So please, welcome Ms. Wah-Ming Chang.
Thank you so much, Elena. Thank you, Elena and Aishan, for inviting me. Thank you to Lynn, Aurora, Chris, and your amazing eCornell crew for producing this. And thank you to everyone for coming tonight. I want to start off thinking about something that's just been on my mind for a long time, but that cohered at the start of this sheltering in place. I want to start off thinking about how we embody community and art together, how we were given a certain standard when we were younger, and then how we came to redefine that standard ourselves as we got older. And of course, how that standard is going to be redefined again and again. It's like what Ross Gay describes, quote, a minor tilting of an axis, But he continues, no tilting of an axis is minor, as you know. So what I want to talk about is how I accepted such standards when I was younger and while in graduate school and also immediately after. And how these standards reveal themselves through various norms that are held up by family, by school, by work, by the society one is born into. And I want to talk about how I see these standards today, 20 years after I did my MFA in creative writing at Cornell. But first, I want to talk about guides. those who make us the idiosyncratic beings that we are. I like the way that Borges refers to them as precursors, how a writer can make known the writers who had come before them. With Kafka, for example, Borges says that there are those writings that precede Kafka that all uncannily resemble him, but they don't resemble one another in the same way. He lists these people as examples: Aristotle and his Zeno's paradox, Han Yu's hazy definition of a unicorn, Robert Browning's imaginary friend, whom he believes eventually to be God, Kierkegaard's North Pole expeditions, scaled down for those who can't afford the real thing, Leon Bloy's dreamers who never leave the city, and Lord Dunsany's warriors who never reach it. Borges says, quote, Kafka's idiosyncrasy is present in each of these writings to a greater or lesser degree, but if Kafka had not written, we would not perceive it. That is to say, it would not exist. The fact is that each writer creates his precursors. Why do I like these sentences so much? If Kafka had not written is so ominous sounding, and the agency that Borges gives the writer is so appealing. For me, this passage it helps to open up new interpretations to how we read the writers we love, how we read one another's work, and how we read ourselves. Who developed whom? I think another reason I like this idea is that a precursor to me is a home, a space where you feel free to explore, to kick back and breathe freely. In my case, it's finding the writers whose work resonates deeply with me. And before I know it, I see their influence everywhere. And so in those people do I assume a kinship. I found a precursor or a guide when I went to Cornell for my MFA 20 years ago, from 2000 to 2002. I'm not talking about a mentor. That's a separate thing, and one whose meaning to you can and will and should evolve over time. I'm talking about the conversations that I can have with the writers on the page. I learned this at Cornell when I began to devour everything by Borges. I learned this also when I had conversations with two people in particular who were important to me there, whose conversations have lasted in my heart, in my head, in a way that I can call them my guides. One is Ache Carrillo. This image, I think this image is up right now. This image is on the day of our MFA reading. That was May 2nd, 2002. Ache died of complications from COVID in April of this year. The other guide for me was Elena Maria Viramontes. In 2002, I turned in my thesis, and this is where my first precursor was shown to me by Elena. She treated my manuscript with the seriousness I needed as a young writer, even if I myself was unsure of the project. During my defense, she didn't just ask me why I had done this or that in the text, but she engaged with it by talking about how it had called to mind certain things for her, all of which led to her suggesting that I read Pedro Páramo by Juan Rulfo. I think that in my 2 years at Cornell, with all the things I learned there and all the things I can say I was happy about, and also all the things I was very unhappy about, this was the moment that embodied guidance for me, for somebody to point me to another guide. So I read the novel, I got extremely terrified, and then I revised the thesis to what it is now and turned it in 2006. I'll be honest, I'm terrified of showing this because I haven't thought of it in years. So much of my writing has changed in the past 20 years, and so much of my reading has changed in the past 20 years. At Cornell, and for a long time after, I felt I was a short story writer. Eventually, I came to realize I did not know what that meant, calling myself a short story writer. And in finding that term to be a constraint, I sought out different approaches to writing. The seeking did not make itself known right away. It took many years to even recognize that I wanted to say something different and in a different way. And then it took many more years to see that I could actually participate in doing something different. To fall into the comfort of labeling myself a short story writer felt incredibly limiting. And when you limit yourself while you're in the middle of writing something, it becomes unwritable. For example, I didn't feel confident in the names in my thesis. The story is set in a fictional Chinese village, yet I named the main character Frida. Why? Well, I was reading a lot of German modern literature then, and I was also influenced by Ha Jin and enamored of the way he named his characters so simply. And to me, that was just the simplest name, and I wanted it. I had read Ha Jin's 1999 novel, Waiting, and one thing among many things that had stayed with me was his simple syntax. It felt like I hadn't come across that before, plain language that accreted into a full story. And all his characters had names that to me sounded so new on the page. Shan Bin, Lin Kong, Shu Yu, Manawu. The Asian or Asian American literature I was reading at that time contained symbolic names. For example, in Amy Tam's Joy Luck Club, or in Su Tong's Raise the Red Lantern, the name Swallow, for example. For me, Ha Jin was the first contemporary Chinese writer being published to a wider audience who was writing about the everyday world. And yet, because of where his writing was set, in China, it was also alien to me, I who had grown up in and around New York City. And it shaped how I looked at myself as a writer who straddled languages in incomplete ways. So from the start, I did not know who my character was in this thesis because I never named her properly. She remained a symbol to me, which meant she came with a set of ideas that had nothing to do with my imagination, but with how I, who was more comfortable in my constraints of the short story form, thought a character in a novel should follow a story arc. In a short story, in my mind, there's a level of opacity that is allowed. In a novel, you must spell certain things out. You must make them clear. I did not know how to bridge that tension at that time. I did not know how to let go of the idea that I had to bridge the tension. The project I'm working on now has a very simple name in the main character. She also has more than one name, and I just decided this morning. One of them is probably my own, since I know it best, and I know how it feels to embody a name like mine. So this is me as a writer, but I also took the craft into my career in book publishing, into production editorial. I've worked in this area for the past 20 years. And back then, to supplement my small salary, I would take on proofreading jobs from other houses whose production editors made up most of my own list of copy editors and proofreaders. At one of those houses one year, I was hired to proofread a novel called Their Dogs Came With Them. It was a novel by Elena Maria Viramontes. This must have been in 2006, the same year I turned in my thesis. This image that I show you now is an email that I sent to Elena after I proofread the novel. And I haven't looked at it since sending it to her. So looking at this now is It's both lovely and just a little bit fleshy, a little bit, because I loved the book so much, and I just poured all of my love into this email. And I'll just read maybe the second paragraph here. Turtle affected me the most. Nearing the end, I had a running inner dialogue. I can't believe Elena is going to make me care for a character so thoroughly and then make me have to mourn her. I can't believe Elena is going to break my heart. I don't want my heart to be broken. I believe my heart is broken. I want to speak about, later on, about Elena as a guide. I also want to speak about how this guidance works in my job today as a managing editor and as VP of company culture at my job. In the production part, production editorial means that you're working behind the scenes. You're not front facing. You're making sure that the manuscripts get to the printer on time and with as few errors as possible. In this way, I'm able to linger in the manuscript, in the words. I'm able to linger in the edits and work with language and work with it so closely with the idea of the typo, of the late edit in the schedule, of excising entire paragraphs, scenes, chapters, or adding them. Watching writers do this to their manuscripts, it has all informed my writing. And I want to give you a sense of the types of books I worked on at each of these houses. On the left here is a group of books at Farrar, Straus and Giroux. I worked on a lot of poems there, and my favorites were Elizabeth Bishop and Louise Glück and Frank Bidart. And I think my very favorite project there was 2666 by Roberto Bolaño. And then titles at Melville House. The Torture Report was quite a thing. If you were on Twitter at that time, was it 2013? A bunch of us stayed overnight at the office to get this thing done and out. And yeah, it was good. And then here's where I currently work: Catapult, Counterpoint, and Soft Skull. For me, when I started in publishing, it was in 1997, and I started in scientific, medical, and technical publishing, and it was all on paper, and it was all done by hand. So meaning for the scientific journals that I had to work on, I had to cut out the folios and the running heads with the X-Acto knife and lay them out on a light box and tape them, and then send them off to the printer. So I learned to be very exact with measurement in that way. And then at St. Martin's Press and FSG, I was still working with paper. And again, that was a way for me to get lost in the amazing writing that I had access to. So for example, I would find myself lost in Susan Sontag's journals, which to me at that time were rather terrifying in their endless lists of aspirations. Nadine Gordimer would fax over her corrections, and I would patiently wait by the fax machine and gently pull out the thin paper as though it were her own skin coming through. One proofreader of mine, who was a Guggenheim Award-winning dancer, threatened to come to my office to demonstrate the ballet moves whose terms Peter Nadash had gotten wrong in the manuscript. Learning about the correctness of language through seasoned copy editors and proofreaders is how I learned how to copy edit and proofread. And for typesetting, for example, Merriam-Webster recommends not to hyphenate the word woman. But sometimes, and this was especially true back then, sometimes the word woman would be hyphenated in the right margin. And then I would have one particular proofreader send back their send back the corrections with a note in the margin, "Don't break woman." And I've always loved that. So it's moments like that where working with text and working with people who correct text did something to me and did something to the way that I looked at my own writing. Today, I have learned that I like to read essays a lot, but essays written in a nod to Barthes, where the writer takes their time reaching the end of the essay by wandering from point to point. Two titles I'm especially fond of at my current job are Pop Song by Larissa Pham, and that is coming out next year. It's an essay collection. And the essay collection Figure It Out by Wayne Kostenbaum, and that was published, I believe, earlier this year or last year. And both of them, they're incredibly different, and yet they have a guide, they have a precursor in common, and that is Barthes. And what I want to do now is just show you an example of a copy edited manuscript and what I see and what I get out of watching a writer edit their own work or be edited by somebody else. On this page, Wayne Kostenbaum's essay is My Brief Apprenticeship with John Barth. And in the second paragraph, you will see he has cut out the sentence, pardon me, he has cut out the sentence, "I still write in Crotts, a practice I owe to him." And I haven't asked Wayne Kostenbaum this, but I was always curious about why he decided to cut that sentence out. It seems like a perfectly fine sentence. But as he was reviewing the copy edits, he was able to do that for himself. And I think that any writer who's able to cut out entire sentences, entire paragraphs, that's a different thing, but just entire sentences, I think that it's a skill that I think comes with age. It comes with all the things that you're reading and all the things that you understand what you want to say to the world. So I just find that very impressive. And this is the rest of that essay. And you'll see that his writing is fairly clean. So there aren't a lot of corrections or edits that he himself added or from the copy editor. And I want to show you also the style sheet that comes with a copy editing job. The style sheet here, what this is it lays out the rules and all the words that need to be spelled a certain way according to the author's preference or according to a certain industry standard. So in this case, this is a very short style sheet. And in this case, we have the acronym SM, for example, set up like this. It's in all caps, no lowercase. So now you know. And this is so that the author understands why certain things were corrected and why they were corrected throughout the manuscript consistently. And then the proofreader afterwards will take a look at this and make sure that everything was set up correctly. So as you can see, it can also act, this document, the style sheet document, it can also act as a discrete document where we interact with words and we play with them. So if there were no explanation to this, what would the story be behind all of these words just pulled out? And where have they been pulled from? It's these sorts of questions that make my job a little fun for me. So next thing I want to do, Elena and I are going to talk about the low-key reading party, and I want to introduce it here just with one prompt. And the prompt is, it touches on guidance, which is what I talked about earlier. And this is a prompt I wrote around companions. Let's have a low-key reading party this Sunday. I want us to think about the companion we turn to in our head when we're thinking things through. Or perhaps this companion shows up without warning. So let's move through this prompt. Move. Make a note of what your movement feels like, what it sounds like, what it looks like, what it smells like. This movement can be made and noted inside your home or outside it. You can move from an inside space to an outside space, or from outside to inside. It can be a regular walk or an errand. It can be the activation of muscle memory as you watch a volleyball game or a dance sequence in a park. It can be something you don't usually do or haven't done in a long time. For me, it's walking through Greenwood Cemetery or dancing in my gray jumpsuit. As you move and make these notes, who is accompanying you, making note of you? Is it Pina? Is it Pessoa? Is it Lu Xun? You turn around and there's Pablo Casals tuning his cello. Perhaps you hear John Berger's shrug in your head every time you wonder what exactly you're writing about. Is it the Chinese auntie in the park practicing the waltz on her own? Is it a friend you no longer see? A lover you no longer love? A parent you can no longer touch? As we listen, as we set up our spells, as we meditate, as we feast, as we correspond with family, friends, or foe, as we create our drafts that encompass all these things, I ask you to think about the companion sitting on your shoulder, asking all sorts of questions, or the companion you're trying to catch up to seek out all sorts of answers. We have many such companions as we move through our day. Let's focus on one of them for this Sunday. You can write this draft in the form of a letter to this person. You can hum it to them. You can murmur your stream of consciousness at them and weave a spell for them to come closer. As long as you're moving and noting who is moving alongside you. That's it.
Well, Min, thank you so much. There are so many things that ran through my head as you were presenting. This idea of Borges as precursors, and then also just what you read in terms of the prompt. Let's talk a little bit about this low-key reading party, because one of the things that I find very profound in the low-key reading party is the sense of proactivism in the light of COVID-19, the quarantine, and the Trump presidency. And just like you, women have begun to initiate community in the virtual world once the pandemic forced a lockdown. For example, we have Lisa Lobi and Julia Alvarez organizing the 101 Nights project, where a woman artist is featured every night up until Election Day. And we have Sherry Moraga and Celia Rodriguez's series, Voz, Vela y Vota. sponsored by Las Maestras Center at UC Santa Barbara. This is what we do in dark times. This is what history and our ancestors have taught us. You know, we create. I had the opportunity to listen in the low-key reading party this last Sunday, and what I experienced was incredible. The people, professions, and the genres were diverse and presented in such passionate but eloquent words. The visceral love of reading was also evidenced. And I was struck by one person's comment, and I think it goes back to what you were saying about the embodiment. He said now that he felt good, that he could put books back into his body. I found that as if I didn't have to that phrase did not need any explanation. I knew exactly what he was talking about. Mm. For those of us who have experienced of not being able to focus long enough to read, this echoed so loudly and I was so grateful for it. And then I see that, the assignments or the prompts, are you're welcome to embrace, but since it's all low key, there's no demand to do anything. And what I like about that the last prompt, that last prompt that you read is so thorough in its thoughtfulness, in engaging in several different ways, and in a reimagining of who you are and what you're seeing. In being able to connect yourself with listening to yourself, I think these prompts are just beautiful. In any event, what I did, I really felt when I was there at the listening, at the low key party listening, I felt as if I was book browsing. I felt as if I was listening to a conversation conducted by some really smart friends. And 2 hours passed without me even noticing it. So, Wah-Ming, please tell us how you did this, why you did this, and its successes. And when I said that it continues on with steady rapture, I can see the rapture in this global community that has been developed to share this incredible interest and passion about books and reading, So I'd like for you to say something about that.
Yeah, I think, let me see if, I think the next image, so here's the next image. These are not all of the books, but a lot of the books that I have bought since meeting with these lovely people, and a lot of it is just their recommendations, and I don't know. We've been reading so much together, and I think that it's basically finding your kin, and often, the fact is that we haven't met each other. Most of us haven't. And I know them through my Instagram account, and many of them also online from many years ago from Twitter, but, we just haven't met. But we have a similar sensibility. We're similar enough that we've just followed each other and enjoy each other's work on these platforms. And just seeing these two piles of books, and it's just evidence of how hungry I was at the beginning of this year for that sort of connection. And how it started was my office shut down, and that was a very strange notion. There was no sense yet of how long we would be out for, and, possibly, in the summer. And the anxiety at that time got to such a pitch that I couldn't sleep. My insomnia came back, and instead of just like tossing and turning, I decided I would just get up and look at the books. There's so many in the house, and they've all been so neglected. So let me just pick one off the shelf and just read out loud. And there was such a pleasure in that. I just did it. I just did it in a corner of my kitchen, and it was like talking to myself, but embodying somebody else's word, like very careful words. And I did this, and then I started doing this regularly with a colleague of mine, Alicia Kroll. We did this, we called each other on the phone every morning for a few months, and we read 2 books by W.G. Sebald, and we read Flights by Olga Tokarczuk. And you'd be amazed how quickly reading a book like that can go by just reading out loud with somebody and just making it into a regular practice. And then the organizing into an actual gathering, that felt incredibly straightforward. It just felt like that's what should happen. And I started it not expecting anything. Again, you know, many of these people were just people I didn't know, but I knew something of their sensibility because of what they posted on Instagram, and invited them. And I figured, you know, maybe people will just read a menu or something, and not get too stressed out about what to present. Instead, there was such a dynamic range of material that day, and I didn't understand what was happening. It was the best surprise possible, and I figured, oh well, let's try this again next Sunday, and that just kept going, and that's gone on since March. What is it? March 22nd. Every Sunday.
That's amazing. You know, I'm thinking about this idea of reading out loud, because I remember there was also a participant who the same participant who said that it was welcoming to have the book back in his body. That leaving voicemails to another person in terms of a poem or some kind of a paragraph. Just to hear that I mean, you know, sound, the sound, it makes you less lonely. It makes you less alone, and actually to see one another, I guess. Because of this lockup, I think that was totally essential, and I think that's why it's you know, when I was listening, I was so enamored by everyone who participated, and there was 25 people, you know, in their passion and in their introduction of a particular book that they were reading, why they liked it, and then also reading a portion of it. And I think that for me, that was the coup de grace. I loved it. I just really, really loved it. And I also like this whole idea of the community. But going back, Wah Ming, okay, so how do you do it? I mean, your presentation, by the way, was lovely. You know, thank you for the kindness of your words. You know, but I'm always, you know, we only are very limited in what we can offer as instructors. But you, both the student and the human being, have such an incredible curiosity and an incredible love of words and literature that it shows in every aspect, including the low-key reading. But how did you do it? How did you get from publishing and also maintaining your writing career? You know, I mean, because you have this incredible beautiful correspondence going on. That was, I believe that was published in Brooklyn Rail, and that correspondence with Selena Sue. There's such an intimacy to. I mean, it could be a diary. It could be a diary, and yet the two of you pull it off. I mean, how do you do it? And plus, I'm sorry, there's some questions also coming, but please.
Yeah. Well, I mean, who are the people who are home to you, right? And if you find those people, then anything that you do together is going to be an extension of you two together. And that's what Selena is to me. That's what Selena Soo is to me. And that's what these people in this group, again, many of whom I've never met, but whose minds, who open up their minds to all of us, not just to me, in a way that embodies all of what you just said. I didn't have to, I don't know, I think the only thing that I can say that I really did in terms of shaping something, other than the scaffolding of the thing itself, getting a Zoom account, posting prompts on Instagram, posting the summaries, all of that. I think that the prompts themselves are so pleasurable because I take a moment and just think about what I want somebody to say to me. I think about what kind of assignment I want to be given, but it's not an assignment. It's something else. And then whoever responds, I feel like I've touched something somehow and touched a nerve of home in them somewhere. And then for them to respond, and what they respond with is a way of them touching a nerve of home inside me. And so then that's how it is. That's how it continues. Yeah.
That's so beautifully said, Wah-Ming, so beautifully said. Well, listen, we have some questions here. And this is, can you talk a bit about what was the main challenge for you moving from an MFA to editing work? And if you could give your MFA student self-advice, what would it be? That's a good question. Those are two good questions.
Okay, remember them for me. So the advice I would say is, I think a lot of it would feel practical. I was there when I was 26, and I think that I don't know that it was necessary for me to be there at that time to get to seek something like this out. I say that because for me, to write is, and also to read, is to embody experience. And it's not just embodying experience, but it's embodying years of experience and all the pleasures and all the pain that come with that. And at 26, I knew nothing. I was very, come on, I was just very comfortable copying writing style. I was very nervous and scared about a lot of things, and especially about what I knew and didn't know. And I can tell you with so much confidence right now that at this age, 20 years later, it's just a completely different story. And at that age, if I had known that I could feel this way today, I don't think I would believe me or you, whoever would say that to the younger me. Because I think at that age, so much is so devastating. And I want to care for that. I want to care that for that 26-year-old or for that 20-something-year-old or early 30-something-year-old. And have them find comfort in the reading and in the work that they do. I think the MFA program could be that structure. I think there's a lot that I struggled against at that time, and I didn't know how to really interpret it or to articulate it. And yeah, I think I would have a long talk with that young person, you know, why are you doing this? And what do you understand about your relationship to words that you feel the need to be in this environment, in an, you know, it is an academic environment. And if you're, for myself, I definitely was not on an academic track. I left my job in publishing, and after graduation, I was very lucky to get that same job back. Very, very lucky. Otherwise, I have no other skills. And so I don't know what I would have done after that.
Oh, well, Ming, I love what you're advising yourself. And, you know, when you're so young, of course, you know, the first thing you do is you want to imitate. And how do we know? I mean, I know my first collection of short stories, The Moths, is just filled with experimentation. Yeah. There isn't, I mean, there's two, maybe, yeah, there's about two stories that I'm kind of proud of, but the rest is all experimentation. I didn't know what I was doing, you know, but I felt I needed to do it. You know, I felt I really needed to do it. But here's another question for you. Can you name 2 or 3 books which have strongly touched a nerve of home, to use your phrase, during this lockdown period?
Sure. I mean, one is okay, those of you who know me, you know what I'm going to say. Camera Lucida by Roland Barthes. I had started reading this last year, I think it was last summer, and just on my commute. My commute is like 40 minutes on the subway. And so that's, you know, every few pages. And when you read Barthes, or when I read Barthes, like it's just like one paragraph per commute, because I find him incredibly dense and lush, and it's intimidating and exciting at the same time. And for the longest time, I couldn't read that book. I just didn't know how to. And then last year, I was able to because of conversations I was having with friends who were photographers and writers. And I just decided I was going to, on my commute, read it. And also that was the first book that I marked up heavily. I don't tend to mark up my books. Maybe I'll underline every now and then, or do something in my notebook, but there's never like a direct correspondence or relationship between my notebooks and the books that I read. So there's no like note taking. In this book, I wrote just everything that was on my mind, including just all the silly, stupid questions like, what in the world is he writing about here? I have to read this 5 times. And then by the time lockdown came around, I put it aside again, and then I picked it up and devoured it and finished it. And since then, I've just been thinking about it constantly. I think about it constantly because of the fact that I had been intimidated by him and didn't want to read him, or felt that I couldn't read him for the longest time. And now I feel like it's not that I understand how to read him, it's just that I understand how to read him for myself. And I took something from it that I feel is very true. It may not be true to the scholars, I don't know, to everybody else, but it feels very true to me. And I love talking about it. And just the fact that the book, it's taking apart how he responds to photography. He's trying to label it. He's trying to name it. But in fact, you start to realize after a certain point that the book is a book about mourning his mother's death. And reading it from that lens just becomes so beautiful and poignant that it didn't matter to me if there were many, many words that I just didn't know and had to look up. And that didn't matter. It was just simply, I knew the sensibility with which he was writing these words.
You know, it's sometimes you have to grow into a book, don't you think? Sometimes you're just simply not ready for it. And part of it, as you said, it's intimidation. Part of it is just terror. But I think, there comes a time when you feel mature enough, I guess, to be able to wrestle with the ideas and the language, and then you become the reader that you really want to become.
Yes.
So yeah. I think let's see. There's I think that's it. Let me see. Can you talk a bit about the main challenge for you moving from an MFA to editing work?
Oh, the main challenge. I think, okay. The main challenge simply being, what is your priority? And if you're in a day job, if you're in a 9-to-5 job where you're there 5 times a week, you're on a commute and you're with people who are, essentially strangers, but you've been forced into these, not forced, but you're in a particular circumstance where you're going to see them for many hours a day. And for me, that was a huge, huge struggle for a very long time because my priority was writing. I had the worst work ethic at a previous job where I would just steal off and from work and take very long lunches just so I could read somewhere and write somewhere. And I can't do that now. Don't worry, everybody else. I can't do that now. But back then, it was hard. It was incredibly hard. And I can't say that I had, it wasn't discipline, I wouldn't call it that, but it was this doggedness to just stay close to the word. There were periods, and one that was very close fairly recently, where I lost all the words. I lost all my relationship to words. And it felt like there's no more relationship, and that felt very dramatic and deep and awful. I don't know if you've ever experienced that, Elena, but it's
no, it sounds horrible.
It's horrible.
So, what happened? How did you become inspired again? How did you? I mean, yeah, that sounds. I've experienced that.
It's friends. It's the kindred spirits who bring you back, and for me, that's all it took. I think as long as I knew that there was a consistent meeting of some kind to go to it just helped me. And even if, I'm thinking of this one particular period where every Sunday there was a lovely, lovely retreat that would happen at somebody's house. And I was not writing, I was not reading, I was not feeling great about any of it. And, but just the consistency of showing up at her place. And that was a level of care that somebody gave to me. And that's what I think about all the time. It's just the consistency, I think, of showing up that helped me get out of that period.
You know, it's interesting. Yeah, you think that you have lost all passion, and the words become meaningless. But I sometimes feel that it's just the emptiness inside of us, and it's not really. And we have to fill ourselves up with friendship, with community, with books, and then slowly we become inspired again. Slowly, the word begins to have an incredible weight and meaning, and then once that comes, it's like, okay, yeah, I can put one word next to another and see what happens,
It's very exciting, yeah.
Yeah, I can't thank you enough, Guoming. You've been just a wonderful guest, and we're coming to the end of the show, and so I'd like to thank Guoming and the Zelazniks and the E. Cornell production, especially Chris Wolford, and everybody for attending. And do take note that the next Zelaznik Reading Series event will be the Triangle Breathing conversation with Hortense Spillers, Alexis Pullingumps, moderated by Lorraine Van Cliff Stefanen on Tuesday, November 10th at 7 p.m. We hope to see you again. Stay safe, wash your hands, and wear a mask. Thank you, Waming. Love you, Waming. Love you.
Love you, Elena.